A young woman on the edge of the abyss receives an unexpected promise, but what she will discover may change everything she knows about wealth and freedom. The early morning in Riverside was heavy as Clay Richards' eyes after another double shift in construction. The autumn sky poured down on the city, transforming the cobblestone streets into imperfect mirrors reflecting the few streetlights still lit. In Clay's strong, tired arms, little Sophie slept peacefully, protected from the persistent rain by her father's worn jacket. The clock showed almost 4 in the morning when Clay spotted the bridge separating downtown from the outskirts where he lived. It was a path he knew as well as his own calloused hands. Hands that built walls during the day, worked security at night, and on weekends delivered meal kits to supplement his income. Since his wife passed away in a bus accident 2 years earlier, his life had been reduced to working and caring for his daughter. There was no room for self-pity, only for daily sweat and unconditional love for Sophie. That's when his eyes caught an unusual silhouette in the bridge's shadows. A female figure stood on the parapet, barefoot, her long dark hair dancing in the storm winds. At first, Clay thought about taking a different route. He had enough problems already. But something about the scene deeply disturbed him, as if a silent scream crossed the night and reached him. "It's going to rain harder," he thought, adjusting Sophie in his arms and quickening his pace toward the solitary figure. He approached without making a commotion, observing the woman's rigid posture, tensed shoulders, and her gaze fixed on the turbulent waters below. It was clear this wasn't someone merely contemplating the night landscape. There was desperation in that immobility, a scream contained in every stiffened muscle. "If you don't jump, I'll tell you the secret to getting rich," said Clay, surprised by his own words. Even he didn't know exactly where that phrase had come from. Perhaps from fatigue, perhaps from a protective instinct that went beyond the daughter in his arms. The woman slowly turned her face, revealing delicate features and eyes swollen from crying. For an instant, time seemed to freeze between them. "Rich?" she questioned, with a voice that carried an unexpected elegance. "You don't look rich," Clay gave a half-smile, approaching a few more steps. "And you don't look like someone who should be on a bridge at 4 in the morning." Her shoulders trembled slightly, a mixture of cold and hesitation. The rain was diminishing in intensity, but remained present, like a silent witness to this improbable encounter. "What's the secret, then?" she asked, still not coming down from the parapet, but with her body slightly turned toward Clay. "First come down from there," he replied, extending his free hand. "It's too slippery for us to talk like this." A second of hesitation was followed by a deep sigh. The woman accepted. The offered hand and, with a small jump, came down from the parapet. Up close, Clay noticed she wore a simple dress unsuitable for the cold night, and her bare feet were injured. "My name's Clay, and this sleepyhead is Sophie," he introduced himself, indicating his daughter with a gentle nod. "Isabella," she responded, without adding a surname or any other information. "There's a 24-hour diner nearby. How about some coffee? You look like you need it." Isabella looked behind her, as if fearing something or someone, and then nodded almost imperceptibly. They walked side by side in silence, only the sound of the rain and wet footsteps filling the space between them. The diner, with its yellowish lights and the smell of fresh bread, was a small oasis of normality at that hour. "2 coffees, please," Clay asked the sleepy attendant, while accommodating Sophie in a chair, improvising a bed with his own jacket. They sat at a table in the corner away from the door. The heat of the dark beverage seemed to bring a little life back to Isabella's eyes. She held the cup with both hands, as if seeking not only warmth but some kind of anchoring to reality. "Aren't you going to ask what I was doing on the bridge?" she questioned, after a few minutes of silence. "I don't need to. I've seen that. Look before," Clay replied, blowing on the hot coffee. "And you, aren't you going to ask about the secret to getting rich?" A fragile smile appeared on Isabella's face, the first of that night. "I think it was just an excuse to get me off there." Clay shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe I really know something you don't." The coffee was consumed in a conversation made more of pauses than words. Isabella told only the essentials. She had nowhere to stay that night, had left home after a fight, had nowhere to go. She omitted details, dates, names. Clay didn't insist. He knew well the value of silence and respect for others' secrets. When they finished, the rain had completely stopped, and the first rays of sunlight began to tinge the sky a grayish blue. "I need to take Sophie home. I have to be at work at 7, said Clay, standing up and picking up his sleeping daughter. "Do you have somewhere to go?" Isabella hesitated, biting her lower lip. The answer was clear in her eyes before she shook her head negatively. "My apartment is small and simple, but there's a sofa where you can spend the rest of the night," he offered, without elaborating much. "No questions, no complications. Tomorrow, you decide what to do." Under any other circumstances, Isabella would never accept a stranger's offer. But there was something about this man, in the way he held his daughter with such care, in the absence of judgment in his gaze, that inspired an inexplicable trust. "Thank you," was all she managed to say. The walk to Clay's apartment was short, crossing streets that were beginning to awaken with the movement of the first workers. The place was on the 3rd floor of a simple building without an elevator in a working-class neighborhood. When he opened the door, Isabella was greeted by a modest but extremely organized and clean environment. "It's not much, but it works. For us," commented Clay as he carried Sophie to the only bedroom. "The bathroom is over there. There are clean towels in the cabinet. Use whatever you need." Isabella observed the small apartment, a combined living room and kitchen, a bedroom, a bathroom. On the walls, some photos of Sophie at different ages, and a calendar with various schedules noted in pencil. It was a simple home, but there was something genuine about that space that she hadn't felt in a long time. "Why are you doing this for me?" she asked when Clay returned from the bedroom. "Because someone once did the same for me when I needed it," he answered, without elaborating. "I'll prepare the sofa for you." While Clay looked for sheets and a pillow, Isabella remained standing in the middle of the living room, like a displaced piece in a puzzle. Her life had crumbled in a matter of days, and now she was here in a stranger's house, accepting help she never imagined needing. "Here you go," he said, finishing setting up the sofa. "It's not the Ritz-Carlton, but it'll do. I need to get ready for work. Make yourself at home." Isabella nodded, sitting on the edge of the sofa. Clay disappeared into the bathroom, and the sound of the shower filled the silence of the apartment. Alone in the living room, she finally allowed some tears to escape. They were no longer tears of desperation like those on the bridge, but of a confused relief, gratitude mixed with shame and uncertainty. When Clay came out of the bathroom, already dressed for work, he found Isabella asleep on the sofa, curled up like a child. He gently covered her with a blanket and left a note on the coffee table. "There's coffee in the thermos and bread in the basket. I'll be back at noon to have lunch with Sophie. The spare key is in the kitchen drawer in case you need to go out." I'll continue from here as the story unfolds. Isabella woke to the sound of childish laughter. For a moment she was disoriented, not recognizing the low ceiling or the sofa where she had slept. The light coming through the window indicated it was past noon. She sat up with a start, straightening her wrinkled dress and trying to organize her thoughts. "Good morning, Sleeping Beauty," Clay's voice came from the small kitchen, where he was preparing something that smelled deliciously good. Or rather, good afternoon. Sophie, seated on a high chair adapted with cushions, was hitting a wooden spoon against an empty bowl, creating a cheerful drumming that echoed through the apartment. Upon seeing Isabella, the little girl opened a wide smile, revealing small baby teeth. "Sleep!" exclaimed the little one, pointing to Isabella. "She really slept a lot," translated Clay, stirring a pot on the stove. "Sophie was watching you like you were a fairy tale princess. I think she's never seen anyone sleep so much." Isabella felt her face flush, both from the situation and the reference to her appearance. She ran her hands through her hair, trying to fix it. "I'm sorry, I didn't plan to. I slept too much. Relax." "It seemed like you really needed the rest," he replied, without taking his eyes off the food. "I'm finishing our lunch. I hope you like spaghetti with homemade tomato sauce. It's the house specialty." The naturalness with which Clay treated her was disconcerting for Isabella. There were no invasive questions, no looks of judgment. It was as if her presence there was perfectly normal, as if waking up in a stranger's. House after being found on a bridge was just another ordinary day. "Can I help with anything?" she offered, timidly approaching the kitchen. "You can set the table. Plates are in that cabinet," pointed Clay. "Sophie already had lunch, but she always eats a little of my pasta too. She's a fan of carbs." The intimacy of that everyday moment made Isabella feel a pang of nostalgia for something she had never experienced. In her home, meals were served by employees on expensive china with silver cutlery. She had never set a table, never participated in the preparation of a simple meal like this. While organizing the plates and cutlery on the small round table, she discreetly observed the apartment in daylight. The walls needed a new coat of paint. The sofa had some patches. The furniture was simple and functional. But there was something welcoming about that space, something that had been missing in the mansion where she grew up. "You said you work in construction, right?" asked Isabella, trying to start a conversation that didn't involve the previous night. "That's right, I'm a bricklayer at Sunrise Construction," answered Clay, serving the pasta on the plates. "I usually work on downtown sites, but this week I'm at a complex on the north side. I took the afternoon off today to sort out some things for Sophie's preschool." "Preschool? Isn't she still too young?" "It's more of a daycare, actually. It's at the neighborhood community center," he explained, sitting at the table and indicating the chair across from him for Isabella to sit. "She goes 3 times a week while I work. On other days, she stays with Mrs. Zimmerman, my neighbor from the second floor." Isabella served herself a small portion of pasta, surprised to feel the appetizing aroma emanating from the simple dish. "You cook well," she commented. After the first bite, "Necessity teaches you." "Since I've been alone with Sophie, I've had to learn a lot of things," he replied, with no drama in his voice. "At first it was just ramen and eggs, but we evolve." "Daddy makes good food," interjected Sophie, abandoning her empty bowl and approaching the table. The child's spontaneity drew a genuine smile from Isabella. It was strange how, in less than 24 hours, that simple apartment seemed more welcoming than any place she had been in recent years. Lunch passed in light conversation. Clay told her about his work, about the neighborhoods of Riverside he had helped build, about how he balanced extra shifts with caring for his daughter. Isabella listened attentively, asking occasional questions, but avoiding talking about herself. "And you? What do you do?" Clay finally asked as he collected the plates. Isabella hesitated. She couldn't simply say she was the daughter of Albert Norton, one of the richest men in the country, heir to a business empire, fugitive from an arranged marriage to the son of one of her father's business partners. "I'm a student," she replied, vaguely. "I'm taking a break from studies for her personal reasons." Clay nodded without insisting on the subject. "Well, I need to take Sophie to the doctor for a routine checkup. You can make yourself at home. There's food in the fridge, and if you need to go out, the key is in the drawer as I wrote in the note." "Actually, I should go," said Isabella, although she didn't exactly know where. "I've already taken too much." "For advantage of your hospitality." "To go where?" he questioned, while cleaning Sophie's face with a damp towel. "Look, I don't know what happened to you, and I won't ask if you don't want to tell. But if you have nowhere to go right now, you can stay a few more days. The sofa isn't great, but it's better than the bridge, for sure." The mention of the bridge made Isabella lower her eyes, embarrassed. She couldn't understand how she had reached that point, or perhaps she understood perfectly. The constant pressure from her father, the suffocating control, the forced engagement to Edward, son of the largest shareholder of Norton Enterprises. The last straw had been discovering that her fiancé maintained an affair with another woman, with the full knowledge and approval of her father, who considered such slips as normal for businessmen. "I thank you very much, but I can't stay here indefinitely," she finally replied. "Nobody mentioned indefinitely," retorted Clay with a half-smile. "Just until you figure out what you're going to do. And if you want to contribute somehow while you're here, you can help with Sophie or with the house. There's always something to do." The proposal was simple and straightforward, with no apparent ulterior motives. Isabella pondered for a moment. Going back to the mansion was out of the question. Using her credit card to stay at a hotel would mean being immediately tracked by her father's security team. Her closest friends would be the first places they would look for her. All right, just for a few days until I get organized, she finally agreed. And yes, I'd like to help somehow. Great. Sophie and I will be back in a few hours, said Clay, picking up a backpack with the girls' things. Oh, there are some clean clothes in the hallway closet. They belong to my sister, who sometimes sleeps here. They might fit you if you want to change out of that dress. Isabella thanked him with a nod. When the two left, she was alone again in the small apartment. She walked to the indicated closet and found some simple pieces: jeans, t-shirts, a cotton dress. She chose the most basic, jeans and a grey t-shirt, and went to take a shower. Under the warm water of the shower, she allowed herself to cry again. They were not tears of despair as on the previous night, but of a strange mixture of relief and confusion. How had her life changed so drastically in less than 48 hours? From the discovery of her fiancé's affair to the impulsive escape from the mansion. Everything seemed a blurred confusion in her memory. She put on the borrowed clothes, which fit reasonably well. She looked at herself in the small bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Without the expensive makeup, without the designer accessories, without the perfectly styled hair, she seemed like another person. Maybe she was. Determined. To repay Clay's hospitality, she began to tidy up the apartment. She didn't know much about household chores. She had never needed to learn, but she made an effort. She washed the lunch dishes, swept the floor, organized Sophie's scattered toys. She found a pot of already cooked beans in the refrigerator and some vegetables. With the help of a quick search on her cell phone, she managed to prepare something, resembling a hearty bean dish. When Clay and Sophie returned, it was already past 6 in the evening. The little girl came running in, but stopped in surprise when she saw the set table and the smell of freshly prepared food. "You cooked?" asked Clay, equally surprised. "I tried," replied Isabella, suddenly insecure. "I hope it's edible. It was my first time making beans." Clay approached the pot, tasted a spoonful and broke into a smile. "It's great for a first time," he praised. "Just needed a little more salt, but we can fix that." The three had dinner together, as if it were a ritual they had practiced for a long time. Sophie told in her still developing childish language about the doctor and the playground, where they had stopped before returning home. Isabella listened attentively, enchanted by the purity of that child who had no idea who she really was. After dinner, while Clay gave Sophie a bath, Isabella washed the dishes and organized the kitchen. There was something therapeutic about those simple tasks, something that kept her anchored in the present, preventing thoughts from constantly returning to the life she had left behind. When Sophie was already in pajamas, ready for bed, she surprised Isabella by pulling her by the hand to the bedroom. "Tell story?" asked the little girl with pleading eyes. "I don't know many children's stories," confessed Isabella, looking to Clay for help. "Make one up," he suggested, with a complicit smile. Sophie likes stories with princesses and dragons, and she always roots for the dragon for some reason. Isabella sat on the edge of the small bed, while Sophie settled under the covers, her eyes bright with expectation. And then, surprising herself, she began to narrate a story about a princess who fled the castle to meet the dragon of the mountain, discovering that he wasn't the monster everyone thought, just a misunderstood and lonely being. When she finished the story, Sophie was almost asleep. Clay, who was watching from the bedroom door, had an indecipherable expression on his face. "You're good with kids," he commented when they left the room. "I had never told a story to a child before," admitted Isabella. "It was special." They sat in the small living room, a comfortable silence between them. The television was on to some random program, but neither of them paid much attention. "Can I ask you a question?" said Clay after a few minutes. Isabella tensed slightly, fearing the direction of the conversation. "Sure." "That story about the princess and the dragon, it was about you, wasn't it?" Isabella felt her heart race. How could he know? How could he see through a simple improvised children's story? "Why do you think that?" she deflected, neither confirming nor denying. "Because there was a lot of truth in it," answered Clay with simplicity. "Especially in the part where the princess said she had never made her own decisions before running away." A solitary tear ran down Isabella's face, which she quickly wiped away. "There are things that it's better you don't know about me," she finally said. "For your own good." Clay nodded, respecting the boundary established. Days turned into weeks almost without Isabella noticing. The simple routine in Clay's house brought a peace she had never experienced. Mornings started early with coffee, preparation while Clay got ready for work. Sophie, increasingly attached to Aunt Bella, as she began to call her, no longer found her constant presence strange. Isabella learned to cook basic dishes, to fold clothes, to clean the house efficiently. Tasks that once seemed completely foreign to her world now were part of her daily life. On afternoons when Clay worked later, she picked up Sophie from the community daycare, crossing the neighborhood hand in hand with the girl, listening to her childish stories about friends and drawings. The small apartment gained feminine touches, a plant here, a colorful curtain there, simple. Objects bought with the little money she had brought with her. Clay didn't ask questions about her past, respecting the silence she maintained on certain subjects. Even so, daily coexistence created an inevitable intimacy. On a rainy Friday, while Sophie took her afternoon nap, Isabella found a box of photographs at the back of the living room closet. She didn't intend to snoop, only to find more space to store the scattered toys. Curiosity, however, spoke louder. Among the old photographs, she found one of a younger Clay, smiling next to a beautiful curly-haired woman holding a baby in her arms. She recognized newborn Sophie and deduced that the woman was his deceased wife. There was so much love in that image that Isabella felt a pang of guilt for invading such an intimate moment. "That was Lucy," Clay's voice startled her. He was standing at the door, observing her with a serene expression. "I thought you and Sophie would still be at the market." "She fell asleep as soon as we got back," explained Isabella, embarrassed. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to intrude." Clay approached and sat beside her on the floor, carefully taking the photograph. "It's okay, it's been a long time," he said, looking at the image with a nostalgic smile. "Lucy was a literature teacher. We met at a construction site at the school where she taught. It was love at first sight, at least on my part." Isabella listened in silence as Clay told her about how he met his wife, Sophie's birth, the plans they had for the future together. He spoke without bitterness, only with the natural longing of someone who lost a loved one. "It must have been very difficult to be alone with a baby," commented Isabella when he paused. "It was. In the first few months I thought I wouldn't make it," admitted Clay, putting the photo back in the box. "But you discover strengths you didn't know you had when you don't have another choice." That conversation created a new layer of connection between them. For the first time, Isabella felt she needed to reciprocate the trust, tell something about herself that was true. "I also lost my mother," she revealed, surprising herself with the confession. "I was 15. After that, my father became another person, colder, more controlling, as if he were afraid of losing control over everything around him, including me." Clay listened attentively without interrupting. "He planned my entire life, where I would study, what course I would take, who I would marry," she continued, the words flowing like dammed water. "When I disagreed, he simply ignored me, as if my opinion had no value at all." "Is that why you were on that bridge?" asked Clay delicately. Isabella nodded slightly. "In part. I discovered that my fiancé, chosen by my father, was having an affair with another woman. When I confronted my father, he said it was something normal, that I should accept it, that marriage wasn't about love, but about alliances, business, maintaining assets." "I'm sorry," said Clay with no judgment in his voice. "No one deserves to be treated like a commodity." "The worst part is that for years I accepted all of this as normal," continued Isabella. "I grew up in a bubble, thinking that was the only possible world." The conversation was interrupted by Sophie's crying, waking up from her nap. Isabella quickly stood up to attend to her, grateful for the interruption that avoided delving too deeply into revelations. As she helped the girl get up and served her an afternoon snack, Isabella realized how she had become part of that small family. Sophie already treated her with the naturalness of someone who has known a person her whole life. Clay trusted her to take care of his daughter, his house, his routine. A feeling of guilt began to grow inside her. How long could she maintain this facade? How long until her past caught up to her? The answer came sooner than expected. The next morning, a sunny Saturday, Clay had gone out to deliver some meal kits, his weekend extra work. Isabella was at the small playground near the building with Sophie, pushing her on the swing, when she noticed a black car with tinted windows parked across the street. She felt her heart race. She knew that model. It was one of the cars from the private fleet of the Norton family, often used by her father's security team. She immediately picked Sophie up, ignoring the girls' protests who wanted to continue playing, and hurriedly returned to the building. She locked the apartment just as soon as she entered, with trembling hands. It could be a coincidence. Maybe it wasn't one of her father's cars. Maybe it was just her paranoia. But the fear was confirmed when, hours later, while collecting mail at the building's front desk, the doorman handed her an envelope without a return address. A lady came to deliver it, asked that it be given personally to you, explained the man. Isabella thanked him, trying to disguise the tremor in her hands. She quickly went up to the apartment and, making sure Sophie was entertained with her cartoons, opened the envelope. Inside was just a newspaper clipping. It was a note in the society column of a major newspaper with the headline, "Missing Heiress. Norton family offers reward for information on the whereabouts of Isabella Norton, missing for 3 weeks." Below the note, handwritten in a handwriting she immediately recognized as her father's, was just one sentence. "I know where you are. Return voluntarily or we will come for you." Panic took over Isabella. How had they found her? Had she been seen by someone, some acquaintance of her father living in that area? An informant? It didn't matter. The fact was that her time in that small improvised paradise had come to an end. She quickly gathered the few belongings she had. She thought about leaving a note for Clay, explaining the situation, but how could she summarize all that in a few words? How could she reveal that she was Isabella Norton, daughter of billionaire Albert Norton, one of the largest fortunes in the country? She decided to wait for Clay to return. She owed him at least a face-to-face explanation. She spent the following hours on high alert, startling at any noise coming from the street, fearing that at any moment the door would be broken down by her father's security guards. When Clay finally arrived, late in the afternoon, he found Isabella sitting in the living room with an anguished expression on her face. "Did something happen?" he asked, immediately perceiving that something was wrong. Sophie ran to hug her father, chattering about her day. Clay listened to her patiently, but his eyes never left Isabella's tense face. "Sophie, sweetie, how about watching a little more cartoon while Daddy talks to Aunt Bella?" he suggested, after a few minutes. When the little girl turned her attention to the television, Clay sat next to Isabella. "They found me," she said, handing him the envelope with the newspaper clipping. "My father knows I'm here." Clay examined the clipping, reading the note carefully. His eyes widened when he saw Isabella's photo in the corner of the page, a photo from a charity event where she appeared elegantly dressed next to her father, in an environment that seemed from another world compared to the small apartment where they were now. "Isabella Norton," he murmured, connecting the dots. "Daughter of Albert Norton, the owner of Norton Enterprises?" She nodded, ashamed. "I should have told you before, but I was afraid. Afraid that you would treat me differently. Afraid that you would turn me in. Afraid that I would have to go back," she explained quickly. "I know I lied by omission, and I understand if you're angry." Clay looked again at the clipping, then at Sophie, distracted with cartoons, and finally back at Isabella. "Why does the note say, 'Return voluntarily, or we will come for you'?" "That sounds like a threat," he observed. "Because it is a threat," confirmed Isabella. "My father doesn't accept opposition. For him, I'm property, a family asset that ran away. The marriage to Edward, son of the company's largest shareholder, is already announced. Millions are involved in this union." "And what do you intend to do?" "I'll leave," she replied with a choked voice. "I can't risk bringing problems to you and Sophie. My father has influence. He can harm your job. He can—" "Wait a minute," interrupted Clay. "Are you afraid your father might do something against us?" "You don't know Albert Norton," said Isabella with bitterness. "He gets what he wants always. and now he wants me to return and fulfill my role. Clay ran his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. Can't you just run away? To another place? With what money? She questioned. My credit cards are blocked. I don't have access to my accounts. The few dollars I brought with me are already gone. Silence weighed between them. Sophie laughed at something on television, oblivious to the tension that filled the room. Stay, said Clay finally, at least until we have a better plan. I can't put you at risk. I also can't let you return to a place where you're treated like an object, he retorted, with surprising firmness. We're friends now, aren't we? Friends help each other. Friends. The word echoed in Isabella's mind. Is that what they had become in those weeks? Friendship seemed too simple a term to define the bond that had formed between them. There was something more, something unspoken, floating between the lines of each interaction, of each exchanged look, of each shared moment. If I stay, they will come for me, she insisted. This note makes that clear. Then we need to be prepared, replied Clay with a determination she had never seen before. I won't let them take you against your will. The conviction in his voice brought tears to Isabella's eyes. How could this simple man, already overloaded with his own struggles, be willing to face the power of Albert Norton for her? The rest of the night passed in a silent tension. They had dinner together, put Sophie to bed, but the subject remained between them like an invisible presence. Neither of them could sleep well. Isabella, on the sofa, tossed restlessly, imagining increasingly dark scenarios. Clay, in his room, planned alternatives, exits, solutions. Sunday dawned with a deceptive calm. They made breakfast together, as if nothing had changed. Sophie, feeling the heavy energy in the air, was quieter than normal, observing the adults with attentive and curious eyes. It was in the early afternoon that the inevitable happened. 3 firm knocks on the door made Isabella's heart almost stop. Clay signaled for her to stay with Sophie in the bedroom and went to answer. At the door, 2 men in dark suits with rigid postures and impassive expressions identified themselves as security from the Norton family. We know Isabella. Norton is here, said the taller one without beating around the bush. We've come to take her at her father's request. I don't know what you're talking about, replied Clay, blocking the entrance with his body. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, warned the second man. We have orders to take her, with or without your cooperation. The tension was palpable. Clay knew he wouldn't stand a chance against those trained men if the situation escalated to physical confrontation. But he also couldn't simply hand over Isabella. I want to speak with Mr. Norton, he said firmly. If he wants his daughter back, he should come personally, not send henchmen. The men exchanged glances. This is not negotiable, replied the first one. We have direct orders. At that moment, Isabella appeared in the living room to Clay's despair. It's okay, she said with forced calm. I'll go with them. Isabella? No, Clay began, but she interrupted him with a meaningful look. It's better this way, she insisted, approaching him and whispering, Take care of Sophie. Don't worry about me. Before Clay could argue, a third man appeared at the door. Older, with gray hair and an impeccably cut suit, he had a presence that immediately commanded attention. Enough drama, Isabella, said the newcomer, with a deep and authoritative voice. You've already caused enough problems. Albert Norton. In person had come to fetch his daughter. The Norton mansion rose imposingly on the outskirts of Riverside, protected by high walls and a security system worthy of a military complex. Located in an exclusive gated community where each residence was separated by acres of carefully landscaped terrain, the property looked more like a contemporary palace than a family home. Isabella observed the landscape through the car window, feeling as if the last few months had been just a dream. Beside her, Albert kept his gaze fixed ahead, his expression impassive like a well-rehearsed mask. Since he had removed her from Clay's apartment, he had barely spoken a few words to his daughter, as if silence were a form of punishment. When the vehicle passed through the electronic gates of the mansion, Isabella felt the weight of reality fall upon her shoulders. She was back in the golden cage. Your cell phone, cards and documents are in your room, said Albert, finally breaking the silence. I hope you've learned your lesson and we can forget this unfortunate episode." "Forget?" Isabella couldn't contain the indignation in her voice. "You treated me like a fugitive, father. You sent security guards to track me. You threatened me." "Threaten?" Albert raised an eyebrow. "I merely recovered my daughter, who was living in deplorable conditions, with a bricklayer." The way he pronounced the word bricklayer carried so much contempt that Isabella felt the blood boil in her veins. "Clay is 1,000 times more of a man than Edward will ever be," she fired back. "He took me in without asking for anything. In return, he respected me, treated me like a human being, not like a business asset." The car stopped at the main entrance of the house. Albert breathed deeply, like someone trying to control irritation. "Listen well, Isabella," he said in a low and controlled tone. "You have two options. Resume your life, your commitment to Edward, and your responsibilities in the company, or face the consequences of your rebellion." "What consequences?" she challenged, sustaining her father's gaze. "To start, I can ensure that your bricklayer friend will never get a job in Riverside or anywhere else where the Norton name has any meaning," replied Albert with calculated coldness. "And believe me, this name has a lot of meaning in many places." The veiled threat was clear. Albert was willing to ruin Clay's life to maintain control over his daughter. Isabella felt a knot in her throat. How could she put Clay and Sophie's livelihood at risk just to satisfy her own quest for freedom? "You wouldn't be capable," she murmured, though she knew exactly what her father was capable of. "Don't test me, daughter," replied Albert, opening the car door. "Now, go to your room and rest. Tomorrow we will have a meeting with Edward and his family to resume the wedding preparations." Isabella watched her father walk away toward the office, feeling defeated. The mansion, which had once been her home, now seemed like a luxury prison. She dragged herself to her room on the second floor, ignoring the curious looks of the staff, who certainly already knew the whole story. The room remained exactly as she had left it, spacious, elegant with a king-size bed, a closet the size of a common apartment, and a balcony overlooking the gardens. Everything there exuded luxury and privilege, and yet Isabella had never felt so poor as at that moment. On the bed, as her father had said, were her cell phone, credit cards, and documents. Next to them, a folder with the latest details of the prenuptial agreement she should sign before marrying Edward. She threw herself on the bed, allowing tears to finally come. She wasn't crying just for herself, but for Clay and Sophie, for the expression of helplessness on his face when the security guards took her, for the confused look of the little girl who didn't understand why her Aunt Bella was leaving. The following weeks dragged on in a suffocating routine. Isabella was reintegrated into the life her father had planned. Meetings at the company, dress fittings for the wedding, carefully selected social events. Her freedom had been curtailed in a subtle but effective way. There were no explicit prohibitions, but discreet security guards accompanied her everywhere, supposedly for her protection. Edward, her official fiancé, proved more irritating than ever. He pretended nothing had happened, treating Isabella's disappearance as a little outburst that had already passed. He continued with his extramarital affairs, not even bothering to completely hide them, confident that the marriage would take place anyway. On a particularly tense afternoon, after another meeting with lawyers about the prenuptial contract, Isabella took refuge in the mansion's gardens. She sat on a distant stone bench, trying to breathe fresh air to calm the constant feeling of suffocation. "Miss Isabella," a female voice pulled her from her thoughts. It was Martha, the oldest housekeeper, who had known her since childhood. "Do you need something, Martha?" asked Isabella, trying to force a smile. "Actually, I would like to give something to you," replied the woman, looking around to make sure they were alone. "It arrived for you this morning, but your father ordered that any correspondence be analyzed by him first." Isabella frowned, confused. Martha had always been loyal to her father. Why would she be disobeying his direct orders? The housekeeper handed her a small common envelope without identification. "Your mother always treated me with dignity," said Martha, with a meaningful look. "I'd like you to know that not everyone in this house agrees with certain attitudes." Before Isabella could thank her or ask any questions, Martha had already walked away, returning to her tasks as if nothing had happened. With a racing heart, Isabella opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note in a handwriting she immediately recognized. "Sophie asks for you every day. I miss you too. If you need help of any kind, I'll be here. He never loses who fights for what he believes in. Clay." On the back of the note, there was a phone number. Tears blurred Isabella's vision. How had Clay managed to get that note to her? And more importantly, how could he still want to help her after all the trouble she had caused in his life? She carefully put the note in her pocket, feeling a spark of hope rekindle in her chest. That small communication was like a window opening in the prison where she found herself. That night, during the formal dinner with her father and some company executives, Isabella observed the interaction between the businessmen. They talked about acquisitions, mergers, eliminating competitors, all with the naturalness of someone discussing a lunch menu. For them, the business world was a chessboard, and people were mere pieces to be sacrificed when convenient. It was then that Isabella understood. Her father would never free her. Not out of love or understanding. The only way to escape that golden cage would be to find a way to neutralize the power Albert exercised over her. After dinner, she retired to her room claiming a headache. She locked the door and carefully dialed the number Clay had left in the note. She couldn't use her own cell phone, which was certainly monitored. Instead, she used a prepaid phone she had secretly bought during one of her rare, supervised outings to the mall. Clay answered on the second ring. "Hello?" The familiar voice from the other end made Isabella's heart tighten with longing. "It's me," she said softly, as if the walls could hear. "Bella." The joy in his voice was palpable. "Are you okay? Are they treating you well?" "Sophie doesn't stop asking for you." "I'm surviving," she replied, trying to control her emotion. "How are you two? My father, did he do anything against you?" "Nothing I can't handle," replied Clay in an unconcerned tone, although Isabella could feel there was more to that answer than he was willing to reveal. "The important thing is you. When can we see you?" "I don't know if it's possible," admitted Isabella with a choked voice. "I'm practically under house arrest, and even if I could get out, I don't want to bring more problems to you two." "Isabella, listen," Clay's voice took on a serious tone. "I don't know much about the world you live in, about money, power, and all those things, but I do know about what's right and what's wrong, and forcing someone to live a life they didn't choose is wrong." Clay's simple and direct words hit Isabella like a ray of clarity amidst the fog of doubts and fears. "I'm afraid of what my father might do," she confessed. "He threatened to ruin your life, Clay. And knowing Albert Norton, these aren't empty words." "Some risks are worth taking," replied Clay with a quiet determination. "Besides, I think I found a way to neutralize that threat." "What do you mean?" "Remember Paul, my friend who works at the local newspaper? He was very interested in your story. A billionaire heiress forced into an arranged marriage, escaping to live a simple life, being practically kidnapped back. That would make quite a story." Isabella felt a shiver run down her spine. The idea of publicly exposing the situation was frightening, but also powerful. Her father prized above all the immaculate public image of the Norton family. A scandal of this magnitude would be devastating, not just for his personal reputation, but for the company's business. "It would be your word against his," pondered Isabella. "And my father has a lot of power over the media." "That's why we need evidence," replied Clay. "Recordings, documents, anything that proves coercion. Paul said that with enough material, he can take the story to national outlets outside your father's sphere of influence." The idea was bold and risky, but for the first time in weeks, Isabella felt there was a real possibility of liberation. In the following days, with extreme caution, Isabella began to collect evidence. She recorded conversations with her father, in which he explicitly threatened her, photographed documents of the prenuptial contract with abusive clauses, recorded statements from Edward about his affairs and how the marriage was just a business deal. Each new piece of evidence was sent to Clay through an encrypted messaging app using the prepaid cell phone she kept hidden. The plan was underway, and each day Isabella felt a strength she didn't know she possessed grow within her. The situation came to a head when Albert announced during a dinner that the wedding date had been moved up. "In 2 weeks you will be Mrs. Edward Mendez," he declared, like someone announcing the weather forecast. "The invitations are already being sent." 2 weeks? Isabella almost choked on her wine. "Why the rush?" "Mendez Incorporations is finalizing a merger with an international group," explained Albert, with clinical pragmatism. "It's strategic for the wedding to happen before the contract is signed. It demonstrates family stability and long-term commitment between the companies." Isabella felt her stomach churn. Not even the pretense of a marriage for love was maintained. It was a business, pure and simple. "And if I refuse?" she asked, surprising herself with the boldness. Albert calmly set down his cutlery, wiped his lips with a napkin, and looked directly into his daughter's eyes. "In that case, I will have to reconsider my approach with that bricklayer friend of yours," he replied with icy calm. "I heard he recently lost his job at the construction company. A pity. So difficult to get work in that field these days." Isabella's heart skipped a beat. So that was it. Her father had already begun to fulfill his threat. "You can't control everyone's life," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "No, just those who stand in my way," retorted Albert. "But enough of this unpleasant conversation. The final dress will arrive tomorrow for the last adjustments. I want you to be impeccable for the photos." That night, Isabella couldn't sleep. The notion that the noose was tightening left her in a panic. 2 weeks. Just 2 weeks before being handed over as merchandise in a commercial agreement disguised as a marriage. She needed to accelerate the plan. She called Clay, explaining the situation. "We need to act now," she said, trying to control the desperation in her voice. "In 2 weeks it will be too late." "Calm down," replied Clay, with the serenity that seemed to never abandon him. "Paul already has enough material. He will publish the first article tomorrow in the local newspaper. Then, depending on the repercussion, larger outlets will pick up the story. And if it doesn't work?" The fear was transparent in Isabella's voice. "Then we go to Plan B," replied Clay with determination. "I'll come get you personally." The idea of Clay confronting the mansion's security was absurd, and Isabella couldn't help but smile sadly. "You and what army?" she asked between tears and nervous laughter. "You'd be surprised how many people are willing to help when the cause is just," he replied, with an enigmatic tone. "But let's hope Plan A works." The next morning, Isabella woke up to an unusual commotion in the mansion. Staff ran from one side to the other, phones rang incessantly, and her father had locked himself in his office since early. Going down the mansion stairs cautiously, Isabella could feel the tension in the air. The staff avoided her gaze, whispering among themselves when they thought she wasn't paying attention. Something big had happened. In the dining room, the television was onto the news channel, volume low. A journalist spoke seriously while a photo of her appeared in the corner of the screen. Isabella slowly approached, her heart racing. "Exclusive. Heiress of the Norton Empire denounces forced marriage and abusive control. Documents and recordings obtained by the Riverside Journal reveal a dark side of one of the most powerful families in America." The plan was underway. Paul had published the article, and news channels were already echoing it. Isabella felt a mixture of dread and relief. "Turn that garbage off!" Her father's thundering voice came from the room's door, making her jump. Albert. Norton was unrecognizable. Always impeccably groomed and controlled, he now had deep bags under his eyes, disheveled hair, and a loose tie. He seemed to have aged 10 years in a single night. "What did you do?" he asked, advancing toward her with eyes injected with fury. "Do you have any idea of the damage you've caused?" Isabella instinctively backed away, but held her ground. "I only told the truth," she replied, surprising herself with her own calm. "Something I should have done a long time ago." Albert picked up the remote control and turned up the volume on the television. Now the journalist was showing excerpts of audio where his voice was clearly recognizable. "Marriage is not about what you want, Isabella. It's about what's best for the company, for the family. Your feelings are irrelevant in this equation. You recorded me? The incredulity in his voice was almost comical. My own daughter. You didn't leave me a choice, replied Isabella. You were willing to destroy the lives of innocent people, to force me to do what you wanted. Albert breathed deeply, seeming to recover part of his habitual self-control. He turned off the television and sat heavily in an armchair. You don't understand what you've done, he said in a lower tone, almost defeated. Mendes Incorporations is already reconsidering the merger. The company's shares fell 6% just this morning. Years of work, generations building a legacy, and you put everything at risk for a whim. Whim? Isabella couldn't believe what she was hearing. You call my right to choose who I'm going to spend the rest of my life with a whim? What do you know about choices? Retorted Albert with bitterness. Born with a silver spoon in your mouth, never had to fight for anything. I built all of this for you, for your future, and this is how you thank me. For the first time, Isabella saw something different in her father's eyes. It wasn't just anger or frustration. It was hurt, a deep and authentic hurt. For a brief moment, she almost felt sorry for him. Father, I never wanted to destroy the company or your legacy, she said, softening her tone. I just wanted the right to live my own life, make my own decisions. Like living in a cubicle with a bricklayer and a child who isn't even yours, he asked with disdain. Is that the great dream for which you're willing to throw everything away? The mention of Clay and Sophie made Isabella's heart ache with longing. What I learned from them in a few weeks is worth more than all. The years I spent in this house, she replied with sincerity. I learned what it is to live with simplicity, what it is to love unconditionally, what it is to build something with your own hands. Albert shook his head, like someone hearing a child say absurdities. Juvenile romanticism, he murmured. It will pass when reality knocks on the door, when the money runs out, when comfort is lacking, when the novelty wears off. At that moment, Albert's cell phone rang. He answered quickly, listened for a few seconds, and his face paled even more. What do you mean, more recordings? He questioned, standing up abruptly. What recordings? He hung up the phone and stared at Isabella with a mixture of anger and disbelief. What else do you have? He demanded to know. What other recordings did you give to the press? An involuntary smile appeared on Isabella's lips. The plan was working better than expected. I didn't give everything at once, she replied with newfound confidence. It would have been imprudent on my part. Let's say I have life insurance. It was a partial bluff. There was, in fact, more material with Clay and Paul, but not as much as she suggested. The strategy, however, was clear. Keep Albert on the defensive, make him fear what else might come to light. You're blackmailing me. The incredulity in his voice was palpable. I'm negotiating, corrected Isabella. Something I learned by watching you for years. Albert ran his hand through his grey hair, visibly disturbed. It was the first time Isabella had seen him lose control of the situation, and there was something strangely liberating about it. What do you want? He finally asked in a tone of defeat. My freedom, replied Isabella without hesitation. I want to live my life as I choose, without interference, without threats, without manipulation. And the company? Your inheritance? Everything I worked for? You can keep it all, she declared, surprising her father. I formally renounce my part in the company and in the inheritance. Put everything in writing with all the legal guarantees you want. In exchange, I want you to let me go and never again interfere in my life or in the lives of the people I care about. Albert narrowed his eyes, suspicious. Why would I believe that you would simply give up billions for nothing? It's not for nothing, corrected Isabella with a serene smile. It's for the most valuable thing that exists, freedom. Something you never understood because you're trapped in your own greed. The silence that followed was heavy, loaded with decades of misunderstandings and frustrated expectations. Father and daughter stared at each other like two strangers who finally saw each other clearly. Even if I agree, said Albert after a long sigh, How can I be sure that this material won't come to the public in the future? You'll have my word, replied Isabella, and a legal contract stipulating that if you fulfill your part, the material will be destroyed. Your word, murmured Albert with a bitter smile. Who would have thought the day would come when I would have to negotiate with my own daughter? It didn't have to be this way, observed Isabella, with a tinge of sadness. If you had listened to me before, if you had treated me as a person and not as property, we could have found a middle ground. Before Albert could respond, his cell phone rang again. He answered quickly, listened for a few seconds, and his face took on an expression of alarm. What do you mean he's here? He questioned, standing up abruptly. Who authorized his entry? He hung up and looked at Isabella with suspicion. Your bricklayer friend is at the gates of the mansion, he informed with incredulity. Demanding to speak to me, of all people. Isabella's heart raced. Clay was there, it wasn't part of the plan. He should have waited for the result of the negotiation. I'll talk to him, she said, quickly heading for the door. No! Albert stopped her by the arm. I want to see what this man has to say. Perhaps it might be interesting to personally meet the individual who turned my daughter's head. In the entrance hall of the mansion, escorted by two visibly uncomfortable security guards, was Clay. He wore a simple shirt, jeans, and sneakers. He seemed out of place in that luxury environment, but his posture was firm, without intimidation. When he saw Isabella coming down the stairs, his face lit up. "Bella!" he exclaimed, taking a step forward, quickly contained by the security guards. "Clay, what are you doing here?" she asked, hurriedly descending. "I came to make sure you're okay," he replied with simplicity. "After the story came out, I was worried about your father's reaction." Albert observed the scene with clinical interest, like a scientist studying a rare specimen. "So you're the famous Clay," he commented, approaching slowly. "The man who sheltered my daughter and helped her publicly defame her own father." Clay faced Albert without backing down. "I helped your daughter fight for her freedom," he corrected, without hostility in his voice. "Something any decent person would do." Albert circled Clay, examining him from top to bottom with curiosity. "Do you know how much the company I built is worth?" he asked in an almost conversational tone. "Billions. Generations of my family worked to build this empire, and you think you can simply come and take the heiress to all of this?" "I didn't come to take anyone," replied Clay calmly. "I came to ensure Isabella has a choice. If she wants to come back with me, I'll support her. If she wants to stay, I'll respect her decision. The difference between us, Mr. Norton, is that for me her happiness is more important than anything else." The simplicity and sincerity of the response seemed to momentarily disconcert Albert. "How touching," he commented with irony. "And how do you intend to support my daughter, who has never worked a day in her life, with your bricklayer salary? Oh wait, you don't even have that anymore, do you?" "Father," protested Isabella, indignant at the deliberate cruelty. "I'll find another job," replied Clay, without losing his composure. "I've always worked and I always will. It's not money that defines a person's worth." Albert laughed, a dry laugh, without humor. "How noble, I almost believed it. But let's be honest, everyone has their price," he stated, taking his wallet from his pocket. "How much is your integrity worth, Clay? 1 million? 2? Name your price to leave my daughter's life forever." The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella held her breath, horrified by her father's explicit proposal. Clay looked at the check Albert was beginning to fill out, then at Isabella, and then back to the billionaire. "You really don't understand, do you?" he finally said with a sad smile. "Some things have no price." Albert finished filling out the check and extended it to Clay. "Everyone says that until they see the zeros," he commented with cynicism. 3 million. More than you would earn in several lifetimes of honest work. Take it and disappear." Clay looked at the check for a long moment. Isabella felt her heart in her throat. 3 million was an unimaginable fortune for someone like Clay. It would solve all his financial problems, secure Sophie's future, bring a security he had never known. With a smooth movement, Clay took the check from Albert's hands. He looked at the paper, then at the billionaire, and then, with deliberate slowness, tore the check into pieces. "As I said, some things have no price," he repeated, letting the fragments fall onto the impeccably polished floor of the mansion. "Dignity is one of them." Albert's face hardened, all pretense of civility disappearing. "Remove this man from here," he ordered the security guards, "and make sure he never passes the gates again." "Wait!" Isabella interposed herself between the security guards and Clay. "No one is going to remove him from here. In fact, I'm the one who's leaving with him." "You're not going anywhere," stated Albert, recovering his authoritarian tone. "Not until we resolve this situation." "The situation is already resolved," retorted Isabella, walking to stand beside Clay. "I've made my choice, and my choice is freedom." "If you walk out that door now, you'll be renouncing everything," threatened Albert. "Your name, your inheritance, your future. Think carefully about what you're doing." Isabella looked at the mansion around her, at the luxury and privilege she had always known. Then she looked at Clay, who remained at her side without pressure, only with silent support in his gaze. "I've already thought about it," she replied with serenity, "and I choose to build my own future with my own hands." "You'll regret it," insisted Albert, his voice now betraying a note of desperation. "When the novelty wears off, when life gets difficult, you'll beg to come back." "Maybe life will get difficult," agreed Isabella. "But it will be my life, my choice. And even on the most difficult days, I'll have something I never had here: freedom and respect." Taking Clay's hand, Isabella walked toward the door under the astonished gaze of the staff who watched the scene. "Don't think this ends here," shouted Albert at their backs. "I have lawyers, I have power, I can make your lives hell." Isabella stopped and turned one last time. "Father, did you forget the insurance?" she asked with a meaningful look. "It wouldn't be prudent on your part to continue with the threats." The reminder of the compromising material still in Isabella's possession made Albert visibly back down. "This isn't over," he murmured, more to himself than to his daughter. "For me it is," replied Isabella, turning again to the door. "Goodbye, Father." The walk to the mansion gate seemed endless. With each step, Isabella felt the weight of decades of conditioning and expectations being left behind. When they finally passed the enormous iron gates, she breathed deeply, as if experiencing fresh air for the first time. Outside, to her surprise, was Sophie, holding the hand of a young woman whom Isabella recognized as Clay's sister. "Aunt Bella!" shouted the little girl, letting go and running in her direction. Isabella knelt, opening her arms to receive the tight hug from the little one. The tears she had contained during the entire confrontation with her father finally came. But they were tears of relief and happiness. "I told you I would bring her back," Clay said to his daughter with a serene smile. "You really came," murmured Sophie, nestled in Isabella's arms. "I came, little one," replied Isabella, caressing the girl's hair. "And now we're going home." Home. Such a simple word, but one that had never meant so much. 3 years passed since that afternoon when Isabella left the Norton mansion behind. Time, that silent architect of destinies, had transformed not only her life, but also the way she saw the world. The small apartment where she had lived with Clay and Sophie had been exchanged for a larger, yet still modest space on the outskirts of Riverside. The walls, now painted in soft tones personally chosen by Isabella, displayed photographs of the three of them at various moments. Sophie on her first day of school, Clay and Isabella at the inauguration of the business they had started together, the three of them at a picnic in the municipal park. In the cozy kitchen, Isabella prepared breakfast while humming a popular song. Through the window, she could see the small garden she cultivated with dedication, each plant, each flower representing roots that now grew in firm and true soil. "Good morning," Clay's voice came from behind her, followed by a soft kiss on her neck. "You woke up early today." "I was inspired," replied Isabella, turning to face him. "Besides, today is a special day." 2 years, right?" Clay smiled, helping himself to coffee. 2 years since we opened Taste and Talk." Taste and Talk was the small cafe they had inaugurated together, located near the state university. What had begun as a modest business, practically improvised, had transformed into a meeting point cherished by students and professors. The menu, which mixed homemade food at accessible prices with a welcoming environment, was a success. "Is Sophie ready?" asked Isabella, setting the table for breakfast. "Almost. She's deciding which headband matches best with her school uniform," replied Clay with an amused smile. "At 5 years old, she's already more vain than her mother." The word mother still caused a wave of emotion in Isabella. She wasn't Sophie's biological mother, but in recent years she had assumed that role, with all the love and dedication possible. The girl in turn naturally called her Mommy Bella, a designation that had arisen spontaneously and that no one had the courage to correct. Mommy Bella. Sophie's animated voice echoed through the hallway, followed by the appearance of the girl already in uniform and with a blue headband in her brown hair. "Look at the drawing I made for Grandpa." Isabella took the colored paper from the child's hands. In it, a gray-haired man smiled, surrounded by disproportionately large flowers. Below, in a childish handwriting still in formation, was written, "For Grandpa Albert with love." "It's beautiful, darling," praised Isabella with a slightly choked voice. "I'm sure he'll love it." The reconciliation with Albert Norton had been a slow and complex process. After almost a year of absolute silence, the first contact came in the form of a formal letter, where Isabella officially renounced her part in the inheritance and in the family businesses. Albert's response was unexpected, a simple request for a meeting, without lawyers, without formalities. The reunion in a neutral cafe in the city center was tense and full of uncomfortable silences. But something had changed in Albert. The scandal in the media, although controlled after Isabella's official resignation, had affected his public image. More than that, loneliness and the passage of time seemed to have softened some of his harder edges. It wasn't a miraculous return to a father-daughter relationship. It was, in fact, the beginning of something entirely new, a relationship built gradually, with clear boundaries and mutual respect. Albert never explicitly admitted his errors, but his actions spoke louder than words. He began to respect his daughter's choices, to truly know her for the first time. The biggest surprise came when Sophie entered the equation. The girl, with the innocence and openness typical of childhood, quickly conquered the heart of the grumpy grandfather. To everyone's astonishment, Albert revealed himself as a dedicated and surprisingly patient grandfather. In Sophie, perhaps he saw a second chance, an opportunity to love without the expectations and pressures that had stained his relationship with his own daughter. "Don't forget your lunchbox, Sophie," reminded Clay, giving the girl a colorful backpack. "And behave well at Grandpa's house this afternoon, okay?" It was part of the new routine. On Fridays after school, Sophie spent a few hours at Albert's house, who now lived in a smaller but still luxurious house on the outskirts of the city. Away from the oppressive mansion, away from the business pressures, the man seemed to finally find some peace. As they finished breakfast, the doorbell rang. Clay went to answer and returned accompanied by Paul, the journalist who had helped publish Isabella's story years earlier. "Good morning, family," greeted Paul, animated, accepting the coffee Isabella offered him. "Ready for the big day?" "We're a little nervous, to be honest," admitted Isabella. Paul had become a close friend in recent years. After the story about the Norton case, his journalistic career had taken off, allowing him to leave the local newspaper to work in larger outlets. Now he returned to Riverside to cover the expansion of Taste and Talk. "I can't believe that in 2 years you managed to save enough to open the branch," commented Paul, biting into a slice of homemade cake. "The downtown Taste and Talk will be an even bigger success than the original." The expansion of the business was a source of pride for the couple. Starting from scratch, with the little money they managed to save in the first months of hard work, Isabella as a waitress in a local restaurant and Clay getting small construction jobs, they had opened the original cafe. Now, with careful management and a lot of effort, they were about to inaugurate the second unit in a busier area of the city. "All thanks to Isabella," said Clay with sincere admiration. "I never imagined that a former socialite would have so much aptitude for business." Isabella smiled, accepting the compliment with humility. What Clay called aptitude for business was, in fact, a combination of what she had learned observing her father for years with the sensitivity and humanity he had never demonstrated. She managed Taste and Talk with a different philosophy: fair prices, well-treated employees, a welcoming environment. Profit came as a consequence, not as the primary objective. "I think it's time for us to go," observed Isabella, looking at the clock. "We need to drop Sophie off at school before we go to the cafe." The journey to school was a precious moment in the family's routine. Sophie, in the back seat, animatedly told about her plans for the day, while Clay drove and Isabella mentally organized the list of pending tasks for the inauguration of the new unit. After leaving Sophie, they headed to the original Taste and Talk. The small establishment was already in full operation, with the hired team preparing everything for another day of work. Mrs. Zimmerman, the former neighbor who now worked as manager, received them with a warm hug. "The suppliers have already delivered everything for the branch's inauguration party," she informed, consulting a clipboard. "And Mr. Anthony called saying he finished installing the last light fixtures last night." "Perfect," replied Isabella, checking some details at the cash register. "I think we're ready." The morning passed quickly, with final preparations and checks. At 3 in the afternoon, Clay and Isabella headed to the address of the new cafe in downtown. The space, larger and better located than the original, had been renovated with great care to maintain the same welcoming atmosphere. The simple but charming facade displayed the name Taste and Talk in stylized letters. Inside, wooden tables, shelves with books available for customers to read, and a long counter created the perfect environment for students, workers, and families. While the staff finalized the preparations for the official inauguration scheduled for 6 in the evening, Isabella went up to the small mezzanine that would function as an administrative office. From there, she could see the entire salon and through the large windows part of the street movement. Clay found her there, contemplative, a few minutes later. "A penny for your thoughts," he said, hugging her from behind. "I was thinking about how life takes turns," replied Isabella, leaning against him. 3 years ago, I was about to marry a man I didn't love, living a life I didn't choose. Now I'm here, inaugurating our second establishment, raising a wonderful daughter, living a true love." "It's funny how things happen, isn't it?" reflected Clay. "If I hadn't passed by that bridge on that specific early morning, or if I hadn't decided to end it all at precisely that moment, or if I hadn't said that crazy phrase about the secret to getting rich," he completed, laughing. Isabella turned to face him, her eyes shining with a mixture of emotion and amusement. "I never asked you about that, you know," she said. "The secret to getting rich, was it just a random thing you said to distract me, or did you have something in mind?" Clay smiled thoughtfully. "At the time, it was really the first thing that came to my mind," he admitted. "I was desperate to get you out of that situation, and that phrase simply came out. But afterwards I began to think that perhaps there was some truth there." "And what would the secret be then?" asked Isabella, genuinely curious. Clay looked out the window at the city stretching before him, then back at Isabella. "I think the real secret is understanding what it means to be truly rich," he replied with simplicity. "It's not about money in the bank or expensive things. It's about waking up in the morning with purpose, building something with your own hands, loving and being loved with sincerity, having the freedom to choose your own path." Isabella felt her eyes moisten. Clay's simple and profound response perfectly summarized the journey they had traveled together. "Then you really fulfilled your promise," she said, caressing his face. "You taught me the secret to getting rich, and I've never felt as rich as I do now." The kiss they exchanged was interrupted by a knock on the door. Paul, the journalist, entered with his notebook. "Sorry to interrupt the romantic moment," he said with a mischievous smile, "but we need the official photo of the owners for the article about the inauguration." They went down together to the main salon, where the team was already positioned for the photo. Before the photographer could shoot, the door of the cafe opened, revealing an unexpected figure, Albert Norton holding Sophie by the hand. "Grandpa wanted to pick me up early from school to come to the party," explained the little girl, excited, running to hug her parents. Albert remained at the door, clearly out of place in that environment, so different from the circles he usually frequented. Isabella approached him, surprised by his presence. "Father, I didn't expect to see you here," she said, unable to hide her astonishment. "Sophie insisted," he replied with an embarrassed half-smile. "She said it would be unforgivable for the grandfather not to be present at the inauguration of the new family business." The use of the word family didn't go unnoticed. It was a small gesture, but significant coming from Albert Norton. "Well, since you're here, join us for the photo," invited Isabella, extending her hand. For a moment, Albert hesitated. His eyes surveyed the simple environment, so distant from the luxury he was accustomed to. Then his gaze rested on Sophie, who smiled expectantly, on Clay, who observed him with distant respect, and finally on Isabella, his daughter, who now seemed to radiate a confidence and happiness he had never seen before. With an almost imperceptible nod, he accepted the invitation. The photo captured an unlikely moment. The Taste and Talk team in the background, Clay and Isabella in the center, Sophie between them, and slightly to the side, a slightly uncomfortable Albert Norton, but undeniably present. The inauguration was a success. Customers, friends, curious people, and supporters filled the space. Mrs. Zimmerman commanded the team with maternal efficiency, while Clay and Isabella circulated among the guests, thanking each one for their presence. Albert remained discreetly in a corner, observing his daughter in her element. There was a dignity in her that went beyond what he had ever imagined, a strength that didn't come from the Norton name or the money she had renounced, but from something much deeper and authentic. When the crowd began to disperse, Albert approached. "Isabella, you've built something admirable here," he said with an uncommon sincerity in his voice. "It's different from everything I imagined for you, but it's impressive in its own way." It was the closest to a genuine compliment Isabella had ever received from her father. "Thank you," she replied, feeling an unexpected emotion. "It means a lot to hear that from you." A comfortable silence established itself between them, filled by the sounds of the cafe in operation. "You know, Father," continued Isabella after a few moments, "perhaps one day you can tell me about how it was building your own company from scratch. I think now I would understand better." Albert looked at her, surprised by the implicit invitation to share a part of himself that he rarely showed. "Perhaps one day," he agreed with a small smile. Night was advancing when they finally closed the doors of the cafe. The inauguration had been a success beyond expectations, with several customers already making reservations for the following days. Exhausted but deeply satisfied, Clay and Isabella returned home, where Sophie was already asleep under the care of Clay's sister. On the small balcony of the apartment, seated in simple chairs, they observed the city lights in the distance. The silence between them was comfortable, of those that only exist between people who know each other deeply. "We're really making it, aren't we?" asked Isabella, holding Clay's hand. "Building our own life, our own path." "One day at a time," he replied with the simple wisdom that had always captivated her. "Brick by brick." Isabella smiled at the appropriate metaphor for a bricklayer. That's how they had built everything. Their relationship, their business, their family, with patience, persistence, and genuine love. The next morning, while preparing coffee, Isabella found the local newspaper at the apartment door. On the front page, the photo of the inauguration of Taste and Talk was accompanied by a headline that made her smile. "Ex-heiress finds true wealth. The story behind the success of Taste and Talk." The article, written by Paul, told in a respectful and inspiring way Isabella's journey. From escaping the Norton mansion to building a thriving business based on values completely different from those she had known in childhood. Clay approached from behind, reading over her shoulder. "True wealth," he repeated, pointing to the headline. Looks like Paul understood the secret too. Isabella turned to face him with the newspaper still in her hands. "I think many people understand the secret," she said. "They just need the courage to live according to it." On that ordinary morning of a weekday, while Sophie prepared for school and the family routine followed its tranquil course, Isabella felt a deep certainty establish itself in her heart. True wealth wasn't in the numbers of a bank account or in the surname she carried, but in the freedom to choose her own path, in the courage to build with her own hands, and in the love that filled every moment of her new life. That simple man on the bridge, with a child in his arms and an improvised promise, had really kept his word. She had